Hello everyone, I am Overkill and today's video is on Be'lakor the Dark Master, first Daemon Prince. This video will be broken into two parts. The first part will focus on his lore, and the second on how I think Sia could translate him into Total Warhammer. The lore I go over will be mostly from his 8th edition version. I will go over some of his 6th edition lore from the Storm of Chaos and Dark Shadow summer campaigns, but most of this was retconned out, but some of it is interesting and may still end up relevant. Alright, I shall begin. Be'lakor was the very first mortal raised to the exalted rank of Daemon Prince, though what sacrifices he made and what horrors he inflicted to do so are lost even to the oldest tales. However, it was Be'lakor that drew the Chaos God's gaze. He somehow managed to intrigue all 4 of the Dark Brothers sufficiently that each granted him a portion of their godly might. This soon proved a mistake. The Chaos Gods seldom share anything for long, and so it was with Be'lakor. As the first, and at that time the only, Daemon Prince, Be'lakor was an incomparable prize. Thus did the Chaos Gods war for control of Be'lakor's tainted soul, each one determined to force his brothers to relinquish their claim. As battle raged, each of the Chaos Gods offered Be'lakor even greater power, if he would simply consent to lead their armies to victory. Such a bargain was little to Be'lakor's liking, so he tricked each of the Chaos Gods into granting their proffered gifts, and then fled to the mortal world without fulfilling his part of the bargains. Be'lakor arrived at a time rife with opportunity for one such as he. The great polar gates had collapsed, and magic coursed across the world. Demons had followed in the magic's wake, and Be'lakor wrested many of them to his will, forging an army to serve his own purpose, rather than those of the Chaos Gods. Thus did the Daemon Prince conquer the primitive humans of the north, though many tribes came willingly to his service, for they had already pledged themselves to the Chaos Gods, and rightly saw their reflection in Be'lakor's dark majesty. He was a creature of living shadows, tangible only when he wished to be, a master of terror and illusion who feasted upon mortal fears. For many generations of the barbarians, Be'lakor reveled in his new station. He crushed races whose names are now long forgotten, and brought war upon the nascent realms of the elves and the dwarfs. Few could withstand Be'lakor, for the stuff of chaos blew strong across the world, and it was his weapon and sustenance both. Cities fell beneath his wrath, their names erased from history, and their peoples trampled into dust. With each victory, Be'lakor ordered monuments raised to his glory. Thus were the toppled stones hewn into new shapes, thrones, statues, and skull-set monoliths, and they throbbed with the power of chaos. Winding stairs reached into the sky, the better for the Daemon Prince to bask in the life-giving winds of magic, and wells were sunk deep into the ground so that he might sup from the chaotic energies that had seeped into the bedrock. However, each conquest not only made Be'lakor more powerful, it also edged him closer to downfall, for even in rebellion, he had unwillingly performed the Chaos God's bidding. Be'lakor had done much to spread the creed of chaos across the world. In time, the Daemon Prince's mightiest mortal followers drew the unblinking gaze of the Chaos Gods, and were raised to Daemon Princehood themselves. This time the Dark Brothers made no effort to share their mortal prizes, and nor was there any need, for there was no shortage of suitable champions. In a comparative eye blink, Be'lakor became but one Daemon Prince amongst many. Where he had once ruled without challenge, he now found himself beset by dozens of would-be usurpers. Worse, with each new Daemon Prince who ascended, Be'lakor felt his own powers ebb, as the gifts bestowed upon him were stripped away and granted to more loyal servants. For long years, battle raged across the mortal lands Be'lakor had claimed, as the newborn Daemon Princes sought to carve out their own territories. Yet none could achieve dominance, not even Be'lakor for all his wit and guile. Countless thousands of humans perished in the wars of the Daemon Princes, yet out of this great evil some good emerged. So many demonic legions had been drawn into the conflict that the realm of Ulthuan was not so beset as it might have been, and this allowed the elves the opportunity to marshal one last desperate attempt to stem the tide of chaos, a great vortex that would siphon magic from the world. The elves' great success was the Daemon Prince's downfall. As magic faded from the world, the daemons were drawn back into the realm of chaos. Be'lakor was the last to be banished, for his connection to the mortal plane was greater than any. But even he could not resist the vortex's pull. With a thin, screeching wail, the Daemon Prince departed the mortal world. In the moment of Be'lakor's banishment, his monuments collapsed, the ruins swallowed by the hills as if they had never been. No trace of his dominion remained. For thousands of years, Be'lakor's essence drifted through the realm of chaos. He yearned to set foot upon the mortal world once more, and feigning repentance, beseeched the Chaos Gods to send him forth once more. Yet the Dark Brothers remembered all too well how Be'lakor had once deceived them, and devised a suitable punishment. Thus, for the second time in his existence, Be'lakor had succeeded in uniting the Chaos Gods with a common goal, though he found the second occasion less to his liking than the first. Unlike other Daemons, Be'lakor would not be permitted to cross the mortal world whenever the winds of magic blew strong. Instead, he would leave the realm of chaos only at the Dark God's wish. This was a boon they granted sparingly, and then only to crown a mortal as the ever-chosen of chaos, a ceremony which served to assure the celebrant of his god's favor, and torment Be'lakor with his fall from grace. Each time the coronation was concluded, Be'lakor was compelled to visit his rage upon the mortal world as an advisor to the Ever-Chosen. Infused with unwanted subservience, Be'lakor led demonic armies at the command of his Ever-Chosen, only to be banished once more, when his unwanted mortal liege was defeated. Yet once again Be'lakor proved his guile, and found ways to stretch forth his will upon the mortal world. In his times of formlessness, he whispered through the dreams of madmen and warlords, offering his service if only they would summon him into the mortal realm. Too often such men accepted Be'lakor's promises, foolishly believing that they could control the Daemon Prince for their own ends. Once given a gateway to the mortal world, invariably Be'lakor slew his liberator, seized the fool's followers as his own, and set them to rebuilding the glory of his halcyon days. Yet such freedom seldom lasted long. Be'lakor's power was but a fraction of that which he had commanded in ancient days, and his ambition ever outstripped his ability. Thus, time after time, a mortal champion laid Be'lakor low, and set the Daemon Prince's wounded spirit back to the realm of chaos, there to plot another escape, or await the rise of the next Ever-Chosen. 12 times now has Be'lakor fulfilled his destiny as Harbinger, each time attempting to escape his preordained fate, but ultimately meeting with failure. Now as the hour of the 13th coronation draws near, Be'lakor is driven as never before to throw off his shackles. He is determined that this time, the demonic legions will not march at the whims of Archaon Ever-Chosen, but in accordance with his own plan, whether the Chaos Gods wish it or no. So that was most of his 8th edition lore from his battle scroll. There isn't too much more, only 2 short stories where he messes with Manfred and kills some dwarfs. Now I'm going to talk about some of the interesting stuff from Dark Shadows and Storm of Chaos. The events of Dark Shadows begin just after the Great War against Chaos in 2302, about 200 years before the current time. After the ever-chosen Azrakul was slain, Be'lakor expected to be returned to the Warp, where he would remain trapped until the next Ever-Chosen came. Instead of this, he found his mind wandering around Albion. Eventually he came across the Ogham Stones, which were essentially the same as Waystones. Be'lakor realized if he could corrupt the stones, he could use them to regain his physical form. He needed help doing this, so he corrupted some of the local shaman called Truthsayers, turning them into his dark emissaries. Once the remaining Truthsayers realized what was happening, a war broke out between the two groups. So now we're going to move forward to the current day, where the war had reached a stalemate. Eventually, both sides decided to seek help from outside the island, and went around the world recruiting allies. All the major factions made their way to Albion, where the war escalated. Eventually the Truthsayers won, forcing the Dark Emissaries off Albion and Be'lakor back into the Warp. The events of Dark Shadows were eventually retconned out, but CA could still make a few references to it. Perhaps Be'lakor could have one of his quest battles here, or he could have a campaign perk called Dark Emissaries that gives him a recruit rank bonus to casters. In the Storm of Chaos, after Archaon kicked off the invasion, Be'lakor brought a demonic legion of his own out of the Warp and into the mortal world. One of the interesting things he did during the Storm of Chaos was find Volkmar the Grim's dead body. Be'lakor then reattached Volkmar's soul and healed him up. When Volkmar was back to full health, Be'lakor promptly nailed him to the demonic legion's battle standard in order to torture and corrupt him. This of course was retconned out of the lore, but I think it would be an interesting reference if Be'lakor got a unique banner when he defeats Volkmar in battle. Now with his lore out of the way, let us get into how he could appear in Total Warhammer. In the 8th edition, Be'lakor could be a general for either the Warriors of Chaos or Daemons of Chaos. This gives CA a few options. Option 1 would be to have him as part of the Daemons of Chaos faction. If CA truly wants to do Daemons of Chaos undivided, then he is the best option. Option 2 is to have Be'lakor become the 4th Warriors of Chaos Lord. Sia could make him interesting as a lord by allowing him to be a hybrid army lord like Arkan and Alariel. He could take a few basic units from the Daemons of Chaos roster. I think one from each god would be enough. It would also build a bridge between the first and third game. So moving on, I will now talk about how his stats would get translated. My guesses here are based on his 2 profiles from 6th and 8th edition, which were relatively the same. I will go in the order that they would appear on a unit card in Total Warhammer multiplayer, with the unit size set to large. I will start with the cost. Be'lakor was expensive, and with how CA translates prices, I imagine that he would be at least 3,500 gold in multiplayer, if not more. On the tabletop, he was a monster both literally and figuratively, so he would be a large character with his model being at least as big as Sarthoriel, if not bigger. I would put his health at around 6,000 to 7,000, which is about the same as the other monstrous legendary lords. While he doesn't wear any external armor, his toughness stat was high enough that he should get about 30 to 50 armor, similar to Sarthoriel. He had the maximum leadership value on tabletop, so his leadership stat should be high, I would say around 100 or even higher. He was fast and could fly, so I would put his speed at around 80 to 100. Be'lakor was an excellent fighter, so he should have high melee attack and melee defense stats of 50 to 70. His weapon strength should be around 500 and armor piercing. Lastly, since he is a large, flying, fast-moving monster, I would give him a charge bonus of around 50. As you can see, he would be pretty powerful lord on stats alone, but he was also an excellent caster, and has the potential to be very unique when it comes to magic. Be'lakor's magic was very different based on the edition. In the 8th edition, his magic was pretty straightforward. Be'lakor used the lore of Shadow and was its lore master. In 6th edition, he was given a special lore of magic under one of his special rules called Master of Shadows. The first appearance of this lore of magic was in the Dark Shadows event, where it had 6 spells and could be taken by dark emissaries. When Be'lakor was made playable during Storm of Chaos, he had access to 5 of the 6. I'll briefly go over the spell list so you can get an idea of what it was and how I think it could work in Total Warhammer, as some of them are pretty unique. The first spell was Bolt of Dark Light. This spell was a magic missile with relatively short range and decent damage. This would be pretty easy to put in as a low-cost magic missile that would be good against single targets. The second spell is Betrayal in Death, and was the one spell Be'lakor couldn't use. This spell was a short-range hex with an interesting effect. If an enemy unit was under the effect of this spell, and lost models in close combat, then those dead models would attack one nearby friendly unit before being removed as a casualty. There are 2 ways I think CA could put this into the game. The first simple way would be to make it a debuff or direct damage spell. I think an interesting way to do this would be to have the dead model explode like the Phoenix Guard ROR and do damage to friendly units equal to the dying unit's attack. The third spell was Nightmare. This was a hex spell that caused an enemy unit to take a panic test. I think this could be translated over as a hex spell that gives a leadership debuff and also makes the target unit feel the effects of fear and terror. The fourth spell is Curse of the Dark Master. This spell was a hex with unlimited range and could be cast on units that were out of sight. It lowered an enemy's to hit roll on both melee and shooting attacks. In Total Warhammer, this would be a debuff to ranged accuracy and melee attack. The fifth spell was Fog of Death. This was a global direct damage spell that could hit everything on the table but the caster. If it was successfully cast, every enemy got hit, and the caster rolled for a 50-50 chance to hit friendly units as well. If directly translated into Total Warhammer, this would be a global flock of doom with a 50% chance to hit friendly units. I think this would be overpowered even if there was friendly fire damage. I think lowering the damage, removing friendly fire, and having the winds of magic cost be high would balance it out and still let it be unique. The sixth and final spell was Coils of the Serpent. This spell was an instant kill. If successfully cast, the caster chose any single model. The chosen model took a toughness test, and if it failed, it got removed as a casualty regardless of wounds, armor saves, or ward saves. The closest thing we have in game is Morgur's Spirit Essence of Chaos ability, which lets him instantly kill a unit below 20% health. I think the only way to translate this spell and keep its flavor would be to limit it to one use, have the instant kill threshold be at 10 to 15% health, and only let it target Seagull model entities. As for the lore attribute, it didn't have one. I assume CA would just make one up. Perhaps they could retool one of Be'lakor or the Dark Emissary special rules into a lore attribute. And that about wraps it up for magic. I think that Be'lakor will get the lore of shadows. It's highly unlikely that we'll get to see his special lore in full. If he does get a spell from his own lore, then it'll probably come as a single bound spell. So now I move on to special rules. Some of the special rules are a bit redundant between the editions, so it may sound like I'm repeating myself a little bit. I will start with his 8th edition rules. He had a few common special rules, and those were Terror, Unbreakable, Fly, and Demonic attacks. For those who don't know, demonic attacks meant that all of the character's attacks counted as magical. His first unique special rule was the Dark Master. This was a leadership debuff that could stack with other leadership debuffs. In Total Warhammer, this would be a leadership debuff similar to Malagor's Something Wicked Comes This Way ability. His second unique rule was Shadow Form. It gave him a ward save and made him harder to hit with ranged fire. In Total Warhammer, it would give him a ward save and or missile resist and missile block. His third and final unique special rule for 8th edition was Lord of Torment. This gave him bonus power dice for magic casting if an enemy unit had failed a panic or break test during the previous turn. I think this would be a very interesting rule if Be'lakor got bonus to magic reserves and recharge rate when enemies are routing or broken. This would make him unique as a caster, because it would allow him to cast more towards the end of a match when other casters have run dry. And now on to 6th edition. In 6th edition, his basic special rules were Demonic, Large Target, Fly, and the Mark of Chaos Undivided. In 6th edition, the Demonic special rule gave a character Instability, Immune to Psychology, Fear, a ward save, and magical attacks. Instability meant that a character could be banished, so in Total War they would have a crumbling mechanic like the Undead. The Mark of Chaos Undivided allowed the bearer to re-roll failed psychology tests. I think this would get translated over as just a simple bonus to leadership. His first unique special rule was Whispers in the Darkness. This caused all enemies on the battlefield to suffer a leadership debuff, and enemies near Be'lakor suffered an even further debuff. I imagine that this would be a campaign perk that lowered the leadership of enemies in your region. His second unique special rule was Night Wards. This caused enemy spellcasters to miscast if they rolled a double or cast a spell with irresistible force. I think this would either give Be'lakor increased magic resistance or give him an aura that increased enemy miscast chance. His third unique special rule was Eternal Terror. First, this allowed him to cause terror. Second, enemies had to take a terror test when charging, being charged by, or starting a turn 6 inches from Be'lakor. I think it would be interesting if this increased the range at which he caused terror. His fourth unique special rule was Shadow Shroud. This was a global debuff that caused all enemy shooting attacks to suffer a -1 to hit. This could be translated either as a buff for friendly units that gave them missile resistance or missile block. The other option is a global debuff to enemy accuracy. His fifth unique special rule was Insurmountable Rage. At the start of each turn, Be'lakor took a leadership test. If he failed the test, he charged the nearest enemy. It also allowed him to reroll failed to hit rolls. Lastly, it made it so Be'lakor always had to pursue enemies he broke in combat. I hope that CA simply makes this a campaign perk that increases melee attack and weapon strength. What I fear they might do is give him Rampage. And that wraps it up for special rules. I don't think every rule here would see translation, but there are definitely enough to make him unique. The last thing I do want to talk about is his one piece of equipment. The only unique item that Be'lakor has is the Blade of Shadows. Be'lakor wields an esoteric demonic blade, its ghostly form and eternal transience between shape and shadow, solidity and silhouette. Mastery of this weapon enables Be'lakor to sift through armor, scale, flesh, and bone without resistance, its essence changing in an instant from formless shadow to murderous edge at its master's whim. Whether the weapon is part of the daemon itself, or perhaps an ancient gift bestowed upon him by the dark gods that Be'lakor somehow retained in spite of his fall from favor, none can truly say. On tabletop, it ignored armor saves and that was it. If put into Total Warhammer, I imagine it would have an activatable ability that gives increased weapon strength or armor piercing damage. I think that CA would also add some additional effect, perhaps something that affects casting like the Sword of Teclis. And now we have come to the end, so I will give my final thoughts. I really hope that CA adds Be'lakor. He would be such a cool character to play as both from a lore and mechanics standpoint. CA has so many options on how they could make him unique, and if he was added to the Warriors of Chaos roster, it would be a cool way to bridge the first and third game. Alright, that will do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have anything in particular you want to see me speculate on, whether it be characters, units, or anything else, feel free to post it in the comments down below. Again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.